It's a wintry welcome. Oops. It's a wintry welcome from Oxford, but I do know there are people joining us from many different parts of the country or countries and around the world, and so it may not be a wintry day where you are. But a warm welcome to everybody. I'm Jonathan Lowe from the Careers and Sustainability Working Group of Chapter UK and Ireland, chapter of Prime. And I know that there are many people here who know quite a lot about Prime and under whose auspices we meet today, but there are also people who don't know much about it. So I'm going to spend just literally 2 minutes introducing and setting the context of this session before Karen Cripps, my co-convener, takes over and introduces our upcoming events as well as our guest speaker today. So the Prime is the Principles of Responsible Management Education, and we have a global mission, business school mission, that's to do three things: to develop responsible decision makers of the future, and very relevant to today's discussion, advance the Sustainable Development Goals as you would expect from any United Nations agency, and to transform management education, because the the understanding is that a lot of management education still is not particularly focused on sustainability, ethics, and responsibility. So that's what Prime is there to do. And the reason that we have potentially such a great reach and why we take our work, I guess, quite seriously is that something like this is according to UNESCO data, something like 30% of the world's tertiary education students study business, management, law, and economics. And that's a lot of graduates every year, and therefore we potentially have a great deal of influence over what people study and the kind of graduates who leave our business schools and our universities around the world. This is a global network of around about between actually closer to 900 signatory members at this point, connecting all those numbers of students, faculty, chapters, and countries in the Prime network. Within that wider Prime network, we are part of the Prime chapter UK and Ireland. There's 110, 112 business schools across those two nations who are part of this chapter. And we established a careers and sustainability working group about 2 years ago now to draw together. And we've drawn together so far about 100 people, partly academics, partly career professionals, partly just other interested individuals. And we may well find that, for example, we've got a lot of coaches who are interested in this particular session who may join our network as well. So we pose together, we discuss together, we generate projects together around addressing these questions of this kind. We were drawn together because what we were interested in collectively was where employability, sustainability, and the future of jobs comes together. And these are some of the questions that we posed. And I suppose particularly relevant to this session, one way or the other, is how do business schools best engage with business sectors and industries to understand how sustainability imperatives are going to impact on their jobs of the future. Of course, many of the other questions we pose are also relevant to the session that we've got running today. We have two particular working projects at the moment. One is a nationwide study into the supply and demand for placement, internship, and graduate roles. And we're hoping to report on that in the summer. We're working at Brookes with UN Global Compact, as well as with 7 other universities. And we have a second project, which is looking at subject benchmark statements. We know that that's kind of key guidance at a national level as to what should be studied within particular subjects or disciplines, looking at how we can further impact and influence the way those subject benchmark statements support work on employability. So this is the context in which we are meeting today. As I say, we have 4 to 5 seminars, webinars per year on top of our working projects. And at this stage, Karen's just going to take over to talk about our next 2 events before introducing Charlie. Over to you, Karen.
Thank you. We will send out all the links shortly. I'll put them into the chat, but we've got another event coming up next month with the head of ESG UK for DLA, Piper, and he'll be talking about sustainability skills and AI. So that promises to be a great event. Next, and Petra, I've seen you in the chat. Hello, Petra. It's a delight to be co-hosting really this workshop with our working group on careers and sustainability in partnership with the group on climate change and environment. And Petra's got lots of initiatives beginning around climate coaching and climate mentoring. So we're excited next month to be hosting the Climate Coaching Alliance. So that promises to be another great event. You're all here today. You all know about this one. And is this where I'm introducing Charlie, or are we moving on to the sign-up links?
We'll do the sign-up link, shall we? And then you can introduce Charlie.
So that I will put all of that into the chat shortly, so you'll know everything to stay in touch. So without any further ado, let me have the privilege of introducing Charly Cox. She is a pioneer of climate change coaching after many years of working in coaching for leadership development, the founding executive director of Climate Change Coaches, and the author of Climate Change Coaching book. Don't know if you can see that or not, but a fantastic book, very much recommended. And Charly is also an entrepreneur in residence at Oxford Brookes Business School. So we connected a couple of years ago around the sustainability mindset, one of the prime working groups, and our common interest in this. I read Charly's book, was immediately enthralled as to everything that she does. And since that time, I've had the privilege to observe two of her climate coaching courses to do an impact evaluation. We've carried out a large research project together. And my work with Charly has been a highlight for me of my professional and personal practice. She is truly wise, inspirational, an ocean of calm, while also a change-making powerhouse. You are going to leave today's session invigorated and informed. Enjoy. Over to you, Charly.
Goodness me. Thanks, Karen. How do you follow that? I think, wow. Well, look, I'm going to share some slides. I've got a lot of slides, so I hope that they're useful. And I want to say before I start that I am not an academic, so please be gentle with me. I know that you're all very rigorous in the way that you do your work. I did teach at Oxford Brookes for a little while in 2018 at undergraduate level, and I've taught on the exec MBA as well. So I have an understanding of the kind of students you're working with, but I can't claim to be a seasoned academic. I'm going to share some slides with you now. Karen, can you tell me, are you seeing the full slide view rather than the presenter view?
No, it's not full slide view.
You're seeing presenter. Okay,
Yeah.
so let me just go back to do it the old-fashioned way. Okay. So now you're seeing the full slides. Okay. So what I want to talk about today is how we can equip students to be leaders with soft skills for sustainability. And what I'm going to do is a couple of things. I'm always told that before you start a presentation, you need to establish your credibility. So here's me telling a load of CEOs what to do in Romania. There we go. I've established my credibility. More to the point, what my company does is probably more interesting. So I run the Climate Change Coaches. We're a team of 14. This is just some of us. We're a B Corporation based here in Oxford. And we work with people all over the world because most of our work is done on Zoom. That's because it's the lowest carbon, not zero, but it's the lowest carbon way of working rather than flying or even taking trains around the place. So these are some of the people we've worked with. We tend to work with 3 different groups of organizations, multinationals typically that are transforming around a green agenda. Then there's another group which are organizations where everybody is doing something about climate or environment. So, for example, Natural England, part of government, would be a good example of them. And then there's other organizations which are helping communities in some way. So you can see the Tamarack Institute. They're a Canadian organization. We worked with one of their Red Cross funded grants, working with communities that had been affected by wildfires. So it's quite a broad range of people, but essentially all of them are climate workers in some way. And all of them need to connect people to this idea of sustainability or climate. And I realized very early on that there was a missing piece of the puzzle around the emotions and the psychology around climate. So often we're talking about technical work, but actually there's a huge emotional piece that is often overlooked. And there are many people now writing about that. And they were writing about it long before I came into this space. But what I noticed when I came in was it took me a very long time to hit on the phrase, the psychology of climate change. Once I did, all manner of research opened up to me. But just coming in as a coach and saying, I wonder if there's anything I can do, it felt like the answer was, no, that's for the technical people, that's for the scientists. There's no room for emotions in this conversation. So today I'm going to inject some of those emotions and explain why. So just to give you some more background to us, we did write the first book on climate change coaching for Open University Press. I think this is a massive underestimation of 12,000 hours of coaching between our team. I have 3,500 on my own, and some of my team have 20 years experience. So I probably need to update that number. We have remarkably shared our methodology with over 42,000 people. We spoke at COP in Egypt. We created some research with Karen, which I'm about to share with you. And also, it's worth saying there is years of existing research into the efficacy of coaching more broadly, done by doubtless people in this room today, or people at your universities, certainly Oxford Brookes being one of them, who have looked at how coaching does that amazing trick of moving people from feeling disempowered, stuck, unable, even resistant, into action and feeling more positive and more capable. That's the shift that we saw needing to happen when it came to sustainability, that people were either resisting change or just baffled by change. And so that change wasn't happening. So what we're going to cover today, and it is a whistle stop, so but buckle up, I would say. What we're going to cover, or attempt to cover, is we always like to start our presentations by saying, this is what you're going to get. What have we learned about soft skills in sustainability work? What are the psychological blockers to progress? So that's actually what we sort of see in organizations, and how coaching helps with that. And then I'm going to go into two very practical ways that you can start doing this right now, and that you can get your students to think about this. First is about values in creating change, and the second is about unlocking a kind of mindset of scarcity. Those two are quite the sort of two big pieces of the trainings that we do. And then the final piece, which is in a way the tagline of our book, which is the power of connection to create climate action. The final piece is why connection itself is fundamental to action in this space. And I'll come to that right at the end, but you may well pick it up along the way and work out what I'm meaning. So Karen and I worked on this amazing piece of research. We found her the people, and she did the work, so she has to take all the credit for this, which was a report that we published last September, looking at how there is a soft skills gap in sustainability. And we wanted to find out if there even was, if this was just an idea that we'd had and that no one else saw. So, as I said, Karen did this as part of the business school at Oxford Brookes. And I'm going to whistle stop through this. We've got presentations on our website of this research, so you can also watch them there. So what we wanted to find out was the changing context of the green transition in organizations, the attitudes towards which skills were required, and the soft skills versus technical skills. How did those two stack up against each other? And then the opportunity for coaching and training in using coaching skills to improve people's effectiveness and well-being. I'm not going to touch on well-being, but there is a big issue of burnout in the sector. So if nothing else, equipping your students with their ability to coach themselves through how they're feeling, and their ability to ask for better work-life balance, for example, would be very important if they're moving into sustainability. So we did a quant survey on LinkedIn, and then Karen performed a qualitative study. In total, we spoke to 159, we had contact with 159 sustainability professionals. 138 of them came through the quant, and 21 were interviewed in 45-minute interviews by Karen. And those were very senior people. So you can see that the survey respondents skewed majority down to professional, they're the dark blue, but the interview respondents skewed to the top. They tended to be on the executive committee or one below the executive committee in organizations. And you can see that we had almost 50-50, 45-55 large to multinationals versus kind of micro to medium organizations. I would say that the interview respondents were more in the multinational camp. And this is where they came from. So the majority, given that most of our team are in the UK, came from the UK, because that's where our connections are, but our clients come from across the world, so we reached out through them. Now, it's worth saying we didn't go on purpose to our actual clients for this, because they've kind of drunk the Kool-Aid. So we did the harder job, and believe me, it was very hard to get people who didn't know us to agree to being interviewed. But amazingly, we did get 21 really high caliber leaders to come. And I would say that is in large part to the fact that this was real research with a real university, because there are lots of people out there. I get one a week asking to be interviewed for research. And actually that research is just a soft sales call. People are really aware of that now. So if you're sitting here as an academic at a university, you really need to recognize the value you have, or the power you have, to get people to take part in studies versus organizations versus companies, because I think people are quite jaded by that approach. But you can see we got a big spread from across the world, mainly UK, US, but we even had respondents from some places in Africa, from Nigeria, for example. We had respondents from out in Asia, from Hong Kong. A couple of the things people told us, I won't go into huge amounts of this. Karen will put a link to the report in the chat. The level of integration within core functions has shifted significantly over the last 10 years, said someone. And that really reflected what we've seen, that sustainability teams are no longer running behind reporting. They're now driving change in organizations, certainly in the big ones, because the bankers and the insurers of those organizations are requiring far more rigorous net zero or sustainability policies than they previously did. So it's no longer about just reporting. It's now actually about genuinely changing. So another respondent said, this is a challenge. It needs people at all levels to be coaching and influencing. We can't just do it from a handful of people in the business. It just won't work. And one of the other things we do is we train internal coaches to hold leaders to account for sustainability strategies. So we train them in climate change coaching skills, which are a lot of systems coaching skills for those of you who are coaches. And that's because the sustainability team alone cannot do this. And yet often organizations have a small army of internal coaches who don't realize that they can play a part in bringing the sustainability strategy to life, while they are meanwhile playing a part in bringing other strategies to life for the organization. So we just sort of connect those dots. Karen framed these as a sort of spectrum of skills, which I thought was really great. There was this idea of technical skills, which is what people typically think of when they think of sustainability. Then there's these kind of attributes that participants in the study mentioned, like passion and empathy. Empathy came up a lot. And then there's these transformative skills, which are the ones that I observed my students when I was teaching. They didn't realize that these were necessary. They thought if they had all the models and all the frameworks, that they'd go into business and they say, look, I know how to use this model. Business doesn't use those models. Those models are an attempt to make sense of business, not a model that the business community is actually running on. And so they then fell down at the first hurdle, because one of the things they really needed to be able to do was communicate properly. And so really getting students to understand that these softer skills are actually most of the job would be really helpful.
Interesting.
I've worked with an organization recently, a very big multinational, that had a sort of quite young team. And some of them said, I got here from my master's degree. I've got all the top technical knowledge. And it turns out I have to navigate organizational politics. That's 90% of my job. So that was making him feel very ineffective, because he didn't know how to. And this was someone who's very highly qualified. So this was the interesting thing for us. We asked, kind of with holding our breath, how important are soft skills versus technical skills? And only 8% of respondents said that technical skills were more important. So 30% said about equal, which was really surprising to us, actually. We thought far fewer would say they were equal. And the majority said that soft skills are most of what we do. And remember, this is also the survey. So this is the professional level. This isn't just the director level where you're more being than doing. This is the actual doing level of the business. And we've got this brilliant professional we work with called Nora, who isn't a professional comic writer, but writes comics for us, and she created this one. So these are the core soft skills that people said were useful to them, and you can see the relative sizes. So collaborating and building coalitions was the biggest. Empowering teams to identify their roles in the transition was the next, and in setting and inspiring vision was the third. And all of those require us to lean into our more kind of emotional selves, not our logical selves. And yet in many organizations, people joke about leaving everything below the neck at the door as they walk in the morning and just leading with logic. What we're finding in this space is that people need to inspire. And I can't tell you the number of people I've coached who say, the problem is I'm just not inspiring, which isn't true at all. It's just they've got an idea of what being an inspirer is. And it's like Barack Obama, you know, and actually they just need to be able to tap into what matters. And I'll come to that in a minute. And then finally, we found out there was a gap. What a surprise. There was a gap between what people felt able to do. So that's the dark blue, extremely easy, and what they needed to do. So people found that it was hard to do these things, especially overcoming resistance to change. And I'm going to talk about that in a moment. Dealing with overwhelm. This is hugely complex. Nobody has the answers. Nobody knows what will happen if you pull that lever. You know, it's a very difficult situation to try and operate in. As people realize what is required, they suddenly realize that it's not about getting to zero. That you can do, you know, 5 people on the executive committee can get most of an organization to zero. I can't tell you the number of times I've been told that. We just put solar panels on, we change the fleet to electric, we can get rid of most of the emissions. But actually what they start to think about is what's the world going to look like in 10 or 20 years and what role are we going to have in it? And that's when AI also loops in, and then their heads start to roll off and they say, oh my God, you know, how can we possibly equip ourselves for that not knowing? And again, this is where being able to tap into our intuitive selves can help us far more than our logical selves can. So I'm just going to plug this because it's really fun. It's totally free. It takes about 5 minutes. We built a quiz to go with the research, which sort of gives you some coaching tips at the end in a report. So feel free to have a go. There's a QR code, and it's completely fun lunchtime activity. So I'm going to sort of turn now into more of my professional sphere, away from Karen's research, and to the sort of things that we see happening. This is taken from a presentation that I give to organizations, and I often see people kind of nodding and going, yeah, I've got all those. Yeah, I've had that one as well. So this is not based on academic journals. This is based on kind of lived experience of our team. This is what happens in organizations when you start trying to make change. Lots of people, when the coaching door is closed, say, I don't feel smart enough for sustainability. This is too complex, too academic. I'm not clever enough. We have made this a technocratic subject at our peril, arguably. And now people, when you ask them about working in sustainability, they immediately think of complexity. And I wonder if it's even putting some of your students off. Staff don't see the relevance. So lots of people will say, listen, obviously I care about climate change, obviously, but I don't care about it. They can't connect to it as a subject. And sustainability, again, those two things acting together, we can't connect to this. When, of course, we should be able to connect to this. This is the umbrella under which all life is lived. And so it's our job to help people find those connections. Managers are stuck in not enough. Interestingly, we worked with one organization that had no budget for years and suddenly had loads of money. And still, the narrative was, we don't have enough, because they hadn't reset the mindset from those years of scarcity, of literal budget scarcity. So, and I'm going to talk a bit about scarcity and the difference between the facts and the perception and what that does. Then this one is really common. Nobody likes change. We'd all rather someone else did it. You know, teams feel threatened, and so they actively resist change. And you know, again, I've worked with sustainability consultancies who say, you know, we're asked to come in and create a strategy. We're paid lots of money to do it. We create the strategy, we give it to the leaders, and they look at it, and then all those other things kick in, and they go, and they put it in a drawer. So unless we can overcome that moment of paralysis, which could have all these factors in it, we're not going to get these things done. We're not going to get this action. And then finally, people feel overwhelmed. Now, that's partly they're just overwhelmed anyway. They've got 4,000 emails in their inbox. They've got back-to-back Zoom meetings. Maybe you're recognizing yourself in this depiction. I know I am. And so just any new stuff is really hard. But then throw in the fact that this is systemic and complex. So what do we do? I'm just going to run through these super fast, just to entertain you more than anything else. How do we try to overcome the blocks? Well, I tell you what we'll do. We'll give them more information. When someone tells us they don't know enough, we say, it's okay. I've got all the information. Someone we know very well in an organization said she used to think it was her job to kind of open their head and pour facts in. And I'm in a room of educators who know that doesn't work. But lots of people in the corporate sphere don't get that. They think, okay, I just need to tell you, when actually we need to help people feel capable of learning. Staff don't see the relevance of climate to their work. So what we do is we inadvertently shame them about how their activities are contributing to the problem. So we say, well, all those flights you've been taking, that's part of that. You do actually have skin in this game because you flew to Dusseldorf last week for that meeting. And it's coming from a kind of intuitively right place, but it's just being executed in an unhelpful way. And so people then just feel shamed and blamed. And they're already feeling that way anyway. So what I see happening here is almost like their scarcity triggers our scarcity. And so people who really care about sustainability ultimately care about the planet, and they can feel a ticking time bomb. They say there's not enough time. So when someone says there's not enough money, they say, well, that shouldn't matter because there's not enough time. And suddenly you've got both of these kind of scarce perspectives clashing. And this one, loads of people nod when I say this one, that actually, if you come across a difficult team, just ignore them, go and work with a team that you get on with better, go round them to their seniors, and then you've got compulsion and you can say, well, your boss said you have to, so just do it, which of course gets us compliance, but not commitment. Or we just ignore that team altogether and we go and find an easier team to influence. And then this one, when we really have to focus on what we're trying to achieve and try and achieve it rather than do our bit and say, well, I did my bit and that's enough. When you come across someone who's overwhelmed, it is partly your job to de-escalate that overwhelm if you want to get your thing done. And we don't see it that way. We think, oh, well, Karen's overwhelmed. I'll leave her until she's calmed down a bit. Or, well, it's her job. She's got to do it. So I'm going to give it to her anyway, even though I can see that she's not going to be able to concentrate on it properly. Actually, overwhelm is a state of mind as much as it is a state of inbox. And if we can help de-escalate that or make it feel easy for Karen to engage in it, then she will. And I say that because Karen is probably the most productive person I've ever met. So that's a lot. There's a lot of things that are creating difficulty in change in organizations. And I hope what you're beginning to see is that what we focus on is making change. And what we've realized, as you probably already have, is that what's actually at issue in most organizations is a human change management process. That's what's happening. We're trying to change the way that people do things in organizations when we're working on sustainability. And two problems are happening at once. One is I don't believe I can, or I'm not motivated enough. And the other is I look out there and I don't believe they will. So that's the system's disbelief. We don't believe the system will change. And that one is different in this kind of organizational change to other organizational change. When organizations reorient, normally it's entirely an internal thing. We're asking them to reorient because of something outside, and it requires everybody to do it, doesn't it? Like wearing masks during COVID. And we kind of don't know if everyone's going to bother, and we're not really sure. And so we can come up with lots of good reasons why we shouldn't bother. So part of our job is to scaffold that sense of motivation that this is worth doing and grow the scale of the people we're working with to meet the challenge rather than try and reduce the scale of the challenge, because nobody can tell you that climate change is manageable. So we work on, we run a course called the Green Transition Coach, and those problems that I've just told you link to a module in the course. I'm going to talk to the blue ones in a moment. This isn't a sales pitch for the course. This is just to kind of show you how we've framed them. Karen has independently evaluated this course, and we run it inside organisations as well as publicly. We run one cohort a year for anybody to come. So what we essentially teach to overcome those problems are these 6 things. So in the first module, we're talking about, let's listen for what's actually being felt, not being said. Because when someone says something very logical, they often feel something else. Let's get better at listening for that. Then let's help people feel capable of learning before we try and teach them. Because often someone's telling themselves in their head, I'm never going to be able to understand this. This is too complicated. And if you're talking, they're not really listening to you. They're listening to this like internal monologue. So help them feel like this is something they can definitely do, and then they will. And all the teachers in this room will be doing that already. Link climate to an issue they already care about. The great thing about climate change is that it touches all aspects of life. So we can find something that will touch their life, something that they care about. We worked with coaches in a bank, and one of them in a mentoring session with me said, oh, I completely screwed up in a conversation with one of the leaders the other day. He said, like, look, I care about the climate change pillar of our strategy, but I really care about the vulnerable people pillar. And I just didn't know what to say because, like, yeah. And I said, but hang on, there are vulnerable people in this country who can't get home insurance because their homes have been flooded 3 times because they're on the kind of the climate has exacerbated flooding where they are. And she went, oh, I'd never thought of it like that. So if she had connected that leader with that sense of vulnerable communities in our country are experiencing hardship as a result of worsened climate conditions, then he would have cared more about it potentially. Then there's challenging scarcity, and I'm going to give you a tool for that in a minute. And then there's tapping into values beneath resistance, and I'm going to explain that in a moment as well. And then the other one is break down actions so they feel more manageable. That's such an obvious thing to say, but we've come up with some cool formulas for making that easy. So let's talk about values. I'm racing because I know I haven't got much longer. This is where I want to break into 2 skills that you can use, that you can encourage your students to understand and use. Lots of organizations are learning about values. Lots of organizations misuse this word and they put some fancy words on the wall. Like I think Enron had honesty or something, or integrity on its wall. I'm not talking about those kinds of values. If value sounds like a big word that feels sort of like, oh God, not this again. Think about beliefs or principles and think about the roots. So Russ Harris, who is the sort of de facto leader of the acceptance and commitment therapy community, wrote in his massively best-selling book, The Happiness Trap, values are our heart's deepest desires for how we want to behave, how we want to treat ourselves, other people, and the world around us. They describe what we want to stand for in life, how we want to act, and the sort of person we want to be. That's what we think about when we think about values. And I want us to think slightly differently to that while managing to hold on to this idea of values being what's in here and what really matters. When you have conversations with people on sustainability, you're often at this level of leaves and fruit. You're often talking about the technical, you're often talking about what people see, the strategy, the products, the way we bring this to life. But and conversations in organizations run at that kind of logical level. Of course they do. That's how all of us communicate. But underneath that is the kind of thing we don't look at there very much, but we can see, which is how we feel, the trunk. But then underneath that again is the bit we can't see, which is the roots, which is what we value, what we care about. And the reason we can't see it is that I say we can't see it is because the person having those values, if you like, doesn't know what they are either. And that's really fundamental, that we don't know why something feels bad and we don't want to do it. We just know it feels bad. We don't want to do it. We don't really take much time to coach ourselves into understanding why. So now I want to bring in this other idea, which is about how we communicate climate. And Mike Hume wrote this book, Why We Disagree About Climate Change, which is really, really interesting. And he makes this link that we have to get beyond this idea that people just don't know. If they knew, then they would act. It's more than that. And he says the sources of our disagreement with climate change lie deep within us, in our values and in our sense of identity and purpose. They do not reside out there, a result of our inability to grasp knowingly some ultimate physical reality. And yet most of us, including me, when we try and talk to people about this issue, whether that's sustainability in a technical sense or climate in a more emotive sense, we bash people with facts. We don't recognize that actually identity, values, and purpose are bound up in the way they make their responses to things. And I think we can see that in politics right now, can't we? Exactly the same thing happening again. People kind of arguing, horse trading facts about why one side is right and the other side is wrong. And no matter how much you can demonstrate that the other side is wrong, and in some cases right now, I think we can, it doesn't change people's fundamental belief in that side. Why? Because their identity is bound up with that particular perspective. So I said this was whistle stop. Here are some typical values. Now, I want you to recognize there's two kinds of values at play here. There's inspiring values, and there are kind of more practical values. So there's inspiring values like honesty, freedom. We'd see kind of fairness. These are kind of the hill I would die on. But there's also a load of practical values like competence, credibility, like creativity even. And what you often hear underneath someone's resistance to change is the practical values. Sometimes it will be something like fairness, but often it will be like, this feels too inefficient to me. Oh, so efficiency matters to you. Or this feels like you haven't really thought it through. So, and I really only want to work with people who, really know what they're doing. So that's competence. And we can overcome someone's resistance to change if we can soothe the doubt that this value is not being met. There is a concern that this is going to cross one of my values. I'm going to give you an example of this that Karen asked me to give earlier, which was we did a demonstration of coaching inside a local authority. And I asked if anyone had anything they were actively resisting about the local authority's net zero strategy. And someone put their hand up and she said, I disagree with eco-friendly housing. And everyone kind of looked at the floor and looked embarrassed. And I said, okay, come up and tell me about it in front of everybody. And I ran her through a model that we teach, looking just at values. So why? Because we can't build them for low-income people. And therefore, it's fundamentally unfair. So there's fairness. That's one of the inspiring values. Great. So if you could be told they'd be fair, would you be on board? No, because I would want to see real plans that show that we can build them at a price that makes them fair and affordable. Great. So what's that? And we got to kind of pragmatism. Okay. So if you could see, if pragmatism could be, satisfied, you could see that these houses could be built at a low price point and that they were going to be offered fairly, would you get on board? And she said, oh yeah. And her whole body language changed from like, I'm going to fight this corner to like, yeah, of course. Why would I not? And her boss put her hand up. I asked for kind of comments from her. Her boss put her hand up and said, I've been going around the houses on this for 2 years with her. And I never knew that's why she refused. And she then turned around and she said, neither did I. And that's what's important about values. We don't really know why we feel the way we do until someone helps us understand. And when we help someone understand, we can overcome their resistance to change. And what we do, of course, is we connect them to something that matters very deeply to them. So they start to feel better. They feel like less of a dissenter. Nobody likes feeling that way. Everyone likes feeling like they're standing up for something important. And the great thing about values is they can be instantiated in many different ways, right? So variety has one way that we're used to doing lots of stuff, but actually maybe there's another way of having a sense of variety in our lives that doesn't mean running ourselves ragged. So we can do lots of different things with values in a way we can't with actions. Another example of that is punctuality. That's not a value. We're either on time or we're late. But maybe punctuality is about respect for us. And in which case, respect can be lived many ways. I can be late and still respectful. So helping people get to that values level creates more flexibility in change. It helps us to change more easily. So I'm going to very quickly talk about scarcity and then I'm going to stop. Scarcity is the other real doozy in this space. There are 3 types of scarcity. Scarcity of resources, typically money, scarcity of time, and then the other one is our abilities. We often don't consider ourselves to be enough. Now, the thing about scarcity is it's about our mental framing of scarcity, because what if we're right? You know, what if there aren't enough people working on this, or there isn't enough time? Well, it's not about the facts. It's about how we relate and identify with those facts. And this is where our team leans into Buddhism for some of the answers. The facts are the facts. Do we relate to them with aggravation or with peace? Are we able to stand aside from those facts and say, okay, that's the way it is, and this is what we need to do? Or do they make us feel constricted and constrained? Put another way, this amazing book came past my desk recently, and I would highly recommend it. It's brilliantly written, and it's very well researched. Malainath and Shafir looked at the mental impacts of scarcity. So they moved away from economics towards behavioral economics. They said scarcity captures the mind. The mind orients automatically and powerfully towards unfulfilled needs. It's more than just the displeasure of having little. It changes how we think. It imposes itself on our minds. Now, they've looked at people who've been purposefully starved to understand starvation in one study in the 1940s. They've looked at people in business who struggle to make decisions or push back on decisions. They've looked at parents struggling to manage the kind of the constraints of family life. And they see across all of these examples, from really extreme examples to really everyday examples, the same mental processes happening. That scarcity, or the perception of scarcity, changes the way we make decisions for the worse. It's well worth looking at that book. So now another book which is excellent, which you've almost certainly all read and probably were doing already, which is the educational psychologist Carol Dweck and her book Mindset. We've taken her ideas and this idea of the power of yet and applied it to scarcity, because this is a really useful tool, and I'd start using it with your students right now if you're not already, to unlock scarcity in people. When somebody comes, they say, well, you can't do it because there isn't enough budget. Adding yet brings the idea back onto the table. It expands literally the viewpoint from there isn't right now, and so therefore there never will be, to there's possibility in the future. So, for example, there's not enough interest among staff for that. That's a classic one that sustainability leaders are told. Oh, so we haven't found a way to make this appealing to staff yet. It's such a simple word, and it seems nuts as I say it to you, but I promise you, start using it today and see what happens. What Carol Dweck's team did was they took a load of teachers, they split them in half, and they said, your half are going to mark students' papers. This was at secondary school in the States. And some of those, all of you are going to mark as normal. So B, C, D, A. You guys over here are going to write the mark, and then you're going to write the higher mark yet. So B, not an A yet. The children who had yet written on their papers performed better, learned more, and had a mindset of capability and possibility. And the others did not. Read her book for much more information on that. But it was stark. The impact of saying, oh, you just haven't got there yet, versus you got to be. The horizons were lifted of the young people just from the addition of the word yet. So start using it in your marking, but also start getting your students to realize, to get this mental agility, this ability to look at a situation and say, how is this not yet? And how can I put that back on the table? And take a screenshot and have a go. We're running out of time, so I'm not going to get you to have a go, but think about what is the second statement for all of these that has a yet attached to it. You will hear these every day. Please use them in budget meetings with your seniors as well. Okay. Now, finally, I said I'd come back right at the end to why does it even matter that we use soft skills? Well, because it turns out that when we're trying to make change, and systemic change particularly, to defeat that second problem of no one else will if I do, we need to feel connected to other people. Isolated people get off the pitch. I have met amazing sustainability people who don't work in sustainability anymore because they just couldn't do it. They felt so alone in what they were doing. And now they do something totally different because it just hurt too much. If you feel your team is with you, your organization is with you, your friends are with you, you will do better. So even highly motivated people come off the pitch when they feel isolated. So I want to share this study, which was just, again, thrown past me this week. And bear with me because it's an odd one to share. But basically, they looked at whether social support can also affect the visual perception of slants. What does that mean? What they looked at was if you ask people to climb a hill on their own or with a friend, how high did they perceive the hill to be? They perceived the hill to be harder and higher when they were shown on their own than when they were with someone else. They looked at two different studies that had looked at this problem. And in both studies, the effects of social relationships on visual perception appear to be mediated by relationship quality. So if you feel closeness and warmth, you are more likely to see the challenge as more manageable. Now, this is looking at people climbing a hill, but I would want to argue that we are climbing a hill here. And this is a way of helping people feel that something is more manageable to do. The only reason the climate change coaches exist 6 years on, and we've done as much as we have, is that I have a team of 14 and I'm not doing it on my own. I'm living proof of the fact that a team helps you feel that things are manageable and achievable. So again, how can we encourage our students to connect better with each other so that they don't see moving into a field like sustainability to be very clever people over there who are very technical, but something that they can do with their business education, that they can take what they've learned and they can be part of the future, because the future of multinationals is being oriented around this. And then anyone in their supply chain, it's for them too. So this is not a will it happen? This is a when it happens, and it is happening. And our students can see their place in this, but they will find their place in it much more easily if they do it together. And this is what that hill looks like in the world that I work in. So, any questions?
Thank you, Charlie. I will stop.